Molly Flynn never left her mother's house. Across all 6 seasons of Mike and Molly, not once did she pack her things and go. She found love, published a novel, became a mother, and pulled off every single one of those things from the same bedroom she grew up in. By the end of this, that one fact is going to feel like the whole story because Molly isn't the rom-com winner the show kept insisting she was. She's a woman whose grief ran so deep it learned to disguise itself as personality, and the show laughed at it for 6 years while calling it a happy ending. It wasn't always framed that way, and that's exactly what makes it so hard to sit with now. Melissa McCarthy plays her with so much warmth that it's easy to miss what's actually happening underneath, and I want to talk about that because the character she built across those 6 seasons is doing something the comedy format never quite had the courage to name directly. And before we're done, I'll ask you whether Peggy Biggs is the real villain of this show or just a woman who got hurt long before anyone was paying attention, so keep that in the back of your mind. So here's what I need you to do. Go back and watch Molly the way you watched her the first time, warm and funny and rooting for her completely. Then watch her the way I can't stop watching her now because those 2 versions are the same person and one of them is devastating. There's a moment in season 4 where Molly finally goes to a therapist, mostly because Mike pushes her into it. The therapist figures it out pretty quickly, telling Molly that all her erratic behavior, the quitting, the spending, the impulsive decisions that seem to come from nowhere, traces back to finally having stability in her life. Stability she hasn't had since her father passed away. The reason that stability makes her anxious instead of calm is that somewhere in her bones, Molly learned that stable things disappear, so she keeps blowing them up herself before they get the chance. That's repetition compulsion, and it's a real, well-documented psychological concept describing how people who experienced early loss can unconsciously recreate instability because calm starts to feel like the moment just before something terrible arrives. The piece itself becomes the warning sign. It sits inside a broader framework that attachment theory would recognize immediately. When early attachment is severed by loss, especially in childhood, the nervous system rewires its relationship to safety itself. Repetition compulsion is one of the ways that rewiring shows up in adult behavior. The show names the first concept and gestures at the second without ever quite realizing it's doing it. The show treats this like a 1-episode fix, giving Molly the breakthrough and then basically never returning to it. What that single session actually does, though, is recolor every choice Molly makes across all 6 seasons. Every impulsive decision, every shopping binge, every time she burns down something that was working. It's all the same wound. It's all her father. So let me walk you through it. Remember the wedding? Season 2 finale, and Victoria hands Molly a garter made from one of their father's blue silk ties, covering old, new, borrowed, and blue all at once. Victoria tells her he'd be walking down the aisle with her, and it's genuinely beautiful, one of the warmest moments the show ever produced. Watch Molly's face, though, and think about what that moment is actually telling you. Her father passed away when she was somewhere between 8 and 10 years old, and the show can't even keep that number consistent, which is its own kind of telling detail. He's been gone for decades, and a strip of fabric from one of his ties is the closest thing to his presence she can hold on her wedding day. That's not a sweet detail tucked into a ceremony. That's a woman standing at the altar next to the love of her life, still carrying a hole that nothing has managed to fill. Molly never processes this on screen, not really, because the therapist gets 1 episode, the wedding scene earns its tears, and then the show keeps moving. Everything that follows, every choice and outburst and impulsive left turn sits directly on top of that hole. Every single time. The show spent 6 seasons positioning Molly as the sensible sister, the counterweight to Victoria's drifting, easy life. Victoria, played by Katie Mixon, smoked and floated along without consequences, while Molly held a teaching job and kept the household anchored. We accepted that framing completely, and for a long time it felt earned. But here's the thing most people miss. Late in season 6, a drunk Molly calls Victoria a screw-up, and Victoria turns around and takes her apart with quiet, devastating accuracy. She lays it out plainly. She may be the one everyone jokes about, but she holds a steady job, carries no debt, and has savings toward a house, while Molly quit a tenured teaching position on a whim and racked up serious debt through shopping she couldn't pull herself back from. Victoria is completely right, and that's what makes the scene so uncomfortable to sit with. Molly built her entire sense of self around being the capable one in a family full of loose ends, but that identity was never real. It was a role she picked up when her father passed away and someone needed to hold things together, and she gripped it so hard for so long that she never actually let anyone hold her. Not until Mike arrived, and even then, the grip didn't fully loosen, not even close. The show frames the season 4 premiere as liberation. Molly quits her teaching job in the very first scene and decides to become a writer, and the whole episode packages it as a bold, empowering leap forward. She's finally chasing something real. Walter Payton Elementary sits on the north side of Chicago, and the show uses that setting consistently without ever quite acknowledging what it means that Molly has spent her entire adult life teaching in the same city, the same neighborhood she grew up in. She never left. Not the house, not the city, not the grief. What actually happened, though, is that Molly was passed over for a promotion she was clearly the strongest candidate for, and the job went to a woman who was involved with the decision maker. That's what she walked out over. Not inspiration, not a dream suddenly crystallizing, but rage and humiliation. And she left a tenured, stable position with no plan underneath her and debt she was already struggling to manage. For the first stretch of season 4, she doesn't write. She picks up a forklift job in Vince's warehouse. She procrastinates. She circles around the things she claims she left for. The dream was never really about writing because the actual escape she wanted was from the place that hurt her, and you can't drive a forklift away from that. Think about what the therapist said. Stability is the thing that frightens her. Quitting the job wasn't a leap toward something. It was Molly doing what she always does, torching the stable ground before it could disappear on her first. And at the end of the season, when the novel gets published, the show puts a bow on it and calls it a character arc. She's still in the same house, though. And here's where it gets genuinely uncomfortable. Molly and Mike spend most of season 3 trying to have a child, 2 full years of attempts and appointments, and the particular kind of grief that comes with repeated failure, and the show plays a lot of it as awkward comedy, clinic visits, and embarrassing moments and nervous waiting rooms. Then it just stops. A showrunner change between seasons 3 and 4 meant the fertility arc was quietly dropped, and the show moved forward without it. The exit cost Molly something the audience never even got to see, because the season 3 finale reportedly included a moment that suggested a possible pregnancy for Molly, and that beat was pulled from the episode that aired, edited out when the show was held back due to the 2013 Moore tornado, real storm coverage that made the tornado-heavy episode too sensitive to broadcast at the time. Nobody got to watch Molly hold that hope. It was just gone. What follows is the moment that genuinely finished me off. In season 5, Mike discovers that Molly secretly went back on birth control without telling him after 2 years of trying together. She'd stopped believing it would work, and she couldn't say that out loud to the one person the therapist identified as her anchor. She made a decision about her own body in complete silence, buried inside a grief too big to speak. The show resolves it inside a single episode because that's the format. But what actually happened to Molly is real, and it's this. She was so hollowed out by 2 years of invisible loss that she hid it from her husband. Just sit with that. Here's the part that dropped the floor out from under me. Somewhere in the later seasons, Joyce Swoozy Kurtz playing her with that particular combination of sharpness and love that makes every scene feel slightly dangerous, reveals who inherits the house, and the answer isn't Molly. When Molly pushes back on it, Joyce explains her reasoning, and it's not that Victoria is the better choice. She's leaving it to Victoria specifically to force Molly out, because if Molly inherits the house, she will stay in it forever. And Joyce knows that with the kind of certainty that only comes from watching someone for decades. That's a mother looking at her daughter and seeing someone who is genuinely stuck, not stuck in a bad month or a rough patch, but stuck the way a person gets stuck when the ground disappears beneath them at 8 or 9 or 10 years old and nobody helps them learn to move again. Joyce sees it. She can't fix it. So she writes it into her will and hopes the paperwork does what she couldn't. Molly is hurt by it, the scene plays as family drama, and we're meant to read it as Joyce being difficult. Honestly, when I worked out what Joyce was actually doing there, something in me broke a little, because Joyce is right, and on some level, Molly knows it, and it doesn't change a single thing. Not yet. Not ever on screen. The series finale gives Molly the ending she deserved. She and Mike adopt a baby boy, William Michael Biggs, and in the same episode, they find out a second child is already on the way. It's warm and it's joyful, and Melissa McCarthy is extraordinary in every frame of it. And it's worth noting that McCarthy won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Lead Actress in a comedy series for this role, which tells you exactly how much she was doing with material the show itself didn't always honor. And all of that is real, and all of it matters. Billy Gardell, playing Mike opposite her across all 6 seasons, matches her in every scene in that finale in a way the show didn't always let him do. And watching the two of them together in those final moments, you understand completely why Mike Biggs was the one person capable of steadying her. Here's the cruelest irony the show ever produced, though. In the final image of the series, Molly is still living in her mother's house. Still, she found love, got married, published a novel, became a mother, and she accomplished every one of those things without ever leaving the bedroom she grew up in, the house Joyce tried to will away from her, the city she never once departed, with the grief she never actually finished carrying. The happy ending is genuine. It's also sitting directly on top of everything that never got resolved, and those two things exist in the same frame at the same time. 6 seasons, the full arc, and the stuckness Joyce spotted clearly enough to put in her will is still there in the final shot. That's the tragedy the show dressed up as a sitcom. Not that Molly failed to win because she won, but that she won without ever getting out from under the weight she'd been carrying since she was a little girl at her father's funeral. The one detail the writers couldn't even keep straight. Was she 8 or was she 10? They couldn't hold on to it consistently, and that tells you exactly how much it mattered to them. Meanwhile, it was the engine of everything Molly ever did. Every single thing. Here's the point. Molly Flynn isn't a character who struggled and grew and came out healed on the other side. She's a character who found someone who loved her steadily enough that she could function inside the grief rather than drown in it, and that is real. And it matters enormously because Mike stabilizing her is not a small thing. Loving someone well enough to stabilize them, though, is not the same thing as helping them heal. The show never gave Molly the space for the second part. One therapy session, one breakthrough, one episode, and then back to the jokes, back to the shopping, and the impulsive choices, and the family dinners in the house she never managed to leave. She published the novel, she held the marriage together, she became a mother, And she did all of it while carrying the same thing she walked into that Overeaters Anonymous meeting carrying in the very first episode, her father's absence, and the specific, restless grief that kind of loss builds in a person when it arrives too early and nobody ever helps them set it down. Molly Flynn deserves so much more than the show ever stopped long enough to give her. The next time you put on Mike and Molly for comfort, because it is comforting, because the two of them are genuinely wonderful together, notice the house. Notice that they are always in that house. Notice what Molly does every time something good and stable arrives in her life, and watch how quickly she moves to complicate it. Notice the therapist scene and how fast it disappears from the show's memory. Notice Victoria calling her out in that living room confrontation and hear it for what it actually is. The most honest thing anyone says to Molly across 6 seasons, dressed up as a spat between sisters. The show gave Molly Flynn everything she wanted. What it never gave her was the thing she actually needed, and she spent 6 seasons being the funniest, warmest, most lovable version of a woman who was quietly carrying more than anyone around her was willing to look at directly. We called it a sitcom. We laughed along with it. And she stayed in that house. Some people never get out of the house they grew up in, not because leaving is impossible, but because they're still waiting for the person who left first to come back. Is Peggy Biggs the real villain of this show, or just a woman who got hurt long before anyone was paying attention? Drop your answer below, because I read every single one.